Okay, this week's episode of Medical Disruptor has someone who is not medical, and she insists that she's not a disruptor, even though I think her ideas are so disruptive in a good way. Dr. Sarah McKay is a neuroscientist and science communicator, specializing in making brain science accessible to enhance health and well-being. She founded Think Brain, an online neuroscience education platform, and she wrote 2 books on women's brain. And then her 3rd book for Dummies brand releases in 2025. She's going to tell us in this podcast her research on why women have brain fog during pregnancy and menopause. And you're going to be really surprised. I found her research to be mind-blowing, but she says it's not mind-blowing and it's not disruptive. It's just science. And she says, do with it what you will. And if you think it's disruptive, that's on you. So I encourage you all to listen to this information and see if you find it disruptive. I thought it was amazing. Welcome to the Medical Disruptor podcast, where our guest does not think she's a disruptor. Dr. Sarah McKay, I am so excited that you're with us here today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. And excited to have someone all the way from Sydney with us. I'm in New York, in case you couldn't tell by my accent. So tell our audience, you might not know the answer, but why do you think we reached out to you to have you on our show? Why do people reach out to you? What is the thing that you do? Tell our audience.
Well, I think I combine, I've got this sort of theory about like purpose. Not that I think everyone needs to find their purpose, but like I think it's just a Venn diagram of 2 circles. It's like, is it awesome and does it help? And the thing that I've always thought was most awesome since, my first year uni when I discovered it was neuroscience. And I still get as excited when I learn about new research like today as I did whenever that was 31 years ago. And my favorite thing to do is just talk about people about neuroscience. I'm not a coach. I'm just like to pontificate and lecture, and people seem to want to listen and they say that it helps. So I think that there's that kind of that Venn diagram there of what I like and other people seem interested in. And perhaps then there's a feeling or a vibe that emerges when I'm in that space talking about brains that people seem to
talk about brains. So you're a neuroscientist.
Yep.
Which already some people are be like, what's a neuroscientist? Let's go super basic. What's a neuroscientist?
Well, I went to university and did an undergraduate degree in neuroscience and then a master's and then a PhD in neuroscience, which I suppose in a way qualifies you or trains you up to become a scientist to do research. And my research field was brains. As you get a little bit further out of your PhD and further along your research career, you get to narrow your focus down a whole lot and become an expert in a really tiny field within your discipline. Neuroscience is a massive and enormous and broad. And that was cool. But I missed that kind of my undergraduate years at uni where you got to think and learn about a whole broad sort of spectrum of things rather than becoming really narrow and deep. I just liked all of the things. And so then I made a leap from working as a neuroscientist in a university medical research institute doing research at the lab bench to communications. Initially, I was working within medical education and communications, putting together education programs for the doctors as part of their professional development training. And then I decided to set up my own business, specializing in all things neuroscience and breaking down the real complex research and explaining the brain, as I like to say. Okay, so I do things now like write books and give talks and go on podcasts and teach courses. All under that big umbrella. The thing that I think is the most interesting is the science of the brain.
The science of the brain. Okay, so I asked ChatGPT, what makes you, like what is unique about you? And he, I decided he's a he in this current terms. I think it's a he, but I think it's a he. So he said 2 things about you. One, that you bridge the gap from what might be perceived as complex concepts in neuroscience, and you bring it down for regular people like me and my audience to understand. Would you agree with that?
That sounds like it in my bio. So yeah.
Okay, good. And 2, he says, or she says, that you specialize in women's brains.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's the latter half of my career, I've focused on that sort of space. Yep.
Okay. Amazing.
Women's brain health, I think, would be
say that again?
Women's brain health.
Women's brain health.
Okay. Health on the end, it changes the conversation.
Tell me why.
Because if you say women's brains, people just want to talk about men's brains or the male brain.
Say more. Say more. Tell me what you mean by that.
If you say I'm working women's brains, people go, oh, women's brain is the female brain. What about the male brain? What's the difference? If you say you work on women's brain health, you add the word health, it sets the conversation on a different direction. Just like that word sets the trajectory down a different path, because people will go, oh, we can talk about pregnancy, women's health issues from a neuroscience perspective versus talking about sex differences.
So you're saying that if we say women's brains, we're going to go compare and contrast.
People want to talk about sex differences, which is fine. I'm more interested in women's health from a brain perspective.
Why do we need a different perspective on women's brains' health? Why isn't a brain? Of course, the answer is no, but I just want to.
Yeah, because, well, I mean, a brain might be a brain starting out in early childhood, but males and females have different biological life courses, especially once you hit puberty. As soon as you add in the word health, then people will start to want to explore what is happening in women's brains from the perspective of women's health, not just mental health or reproductive health, but just that kind of that broad overarching thing, rather than male-female brain sex differences, of which there are some, and some more than some people would like to believe and less than others would hope for, is the kind of the line in there.
Was there a lot of research? Are you a pioneer in this topic?
I'm a pioneer. There's other people who are the pioneers. I'm just the one describing their pioneering journeys. Women's health, the first thing I ever wrote about women's brain health was in 2015. And I was writing for the ABC here in Australia. And I was writing a brain blog for one of the online sites. My editor asked me to write an article about menopause and brain fog, precursor for dementia. It's interesting to look back 10 years down the track, what the conversations were then around that specific aspect of women's health. That was what set me off on the trajectory of writing my first book, looking at women's brain health across the lifespan. Sometimes it would be fascinating to see where there was a large dearth of research on a topic you might not expect. For example, there was always quite a lot of research done looking at cognitive testing. So you sit someone down and do various tests to look at things like verbal recall or memory, maze finding, rotating 3D objects in your mind's eye, like cognitive testing at different points across the menstrual cycle. There was actually tons of research on that. When I first started writing, there was no research on what happens to women's brains during pregnancy. That's exploded as a new discipline within the last 7 or 8 years. There's always been a lot of research on Alzheimer's and dementia. People have always been interested in the prevalence being different in males and females and why. That's another well-researched space. For a long time, there was very little research on the effects of the oral contraceptive pill on the brain. Sometimes that would come about because one person years ago got a grant, set up a lab, and then created a group around that, and then offshoots have set up new labs. So there would be these little sub-disciplines. That's just what happens in science. It rolls that way. There'd be these odd topics of very well research and big gaps in other spaces.
So it sounds like on some topics, I know you don't really shunning away from this, but you're a trailblazer and some of these topics didn't exist.
I think what I just did was look across the lifespan and go, hey, there's research in these pockets here. Let's talk about that and acknowledge where there's none. People get upset about the historical reasons why we've got gaps in the research in women's health. There are reasons you can blame the patriarchy, or you could just look at there's various kinds of reasons why there are gaps in women's research. But what I think is much more interesting and exciting, one of my failings is I'm internally optimistic. I think the gaps are there because we've gathered the data. Scientists like data. And when there's gaps in the data, it's like, awesome, let's get a research grant to fill that up. We've identified the gaps in the data, and there have been a lot of moves within the last sort of 5 years to mandate research around women's brain health, mandate research on sex differences. Sex as a biological variable is now really important within all health medical research, but especially neuroscience research. We're starting to fund the research in it to fill the gaps. There's also lots of amazing, and a lot of women rising the ranks within neuroscience. There's always been gender parity in neuroscience. People think it's like, quantum engineering where there's more men than women. There's always been gender parity, but now the women have risen up the ranks and are asking the questions and getting the grants and starting to look at the research. So now we've got these, disciplines and all of these research labs around the world that are looking at things like the neurobiology of female puberty, the neurobiology of the menstrual cycle, oral contraceptive pill, pregnancy, motherhood, what's happening at menopause, all of these women's brain health issues, which have taken a really long time to be taken seriously. Previously, I think women were always a bit of a niche.
Right.
We're not niche, as we know.
We're not niche in 2015 when you started.
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting time to be. I'm just in this sort of the grandstand, like looking on at the work that's being done and just doing the cheerleading. And
so let me ask you this then. Can you give us like, and then I want to bring this back to another guest that I had a few weeks ago, but can you give us a key takeaway around menopause and brain fog? Is it
menopause and brain fog?
Is it secondary to our estrogen going low? Is it that sense?
Like it has been very difficult to determine up until this point. Because brain fog's like this description of a symptom that you have. And like people with ADHD talk about brain fog and new mothers talk about brain fog. We just don't use the same word. That feeling of like you can't pay attention, you can't concentrate, your brain's just not working right. And there could be many reasons for that. You could be burned out. You could have, recovering from a virus. So brain fog's just this description that we have. And in menopause, lots of women talk about having this. For a long time, we didn't know, and we're still not entirely sure, but I have my theories based on my understanding, whether it was menopause, you're losing all of your estrogen. Everyone's been talking about nothing but menopause these days, so I won't get too much into the physiology. But essentially, as your eggs run out, your ovarian hormones roller coaster a bit as they're trying to communicate with the brain, and the brain's trying to communicate back with them. And that roller coastering is that change in hormones. And we know that the brain is like a receiver of hormones and requires hormones for signaling. Is the brain fog a direct consequence of changes in hormone levels? Or is it like a secondary or tertiary down the track a bit? It's like you've pushed a domino and it's fallen over. We understand very clearly the role of hormones and vasomotor symptoms, like, getting all hot and sweaty and
hot flashes,
waking up at night, hot flashes, night sweats. We know that if we know thermoregulation and sleep are intimately entwined. And if you're a young teenage guy and it's too hot at night, you're not going to have a very good night's sleep. You might not wake up, but it's going to disrupt your sleep architecture. So there we've got hormones, we've got thermoregulation, and then we've got sleep. And we know what happens if you have one night of terrible sleep. I didn't sleep very well last night. I don't feel, form as usual today. I'd had quite a bad night's sleep. But if that was 7 nights this week, and then it was for a months, years, of course,
I'll have brain fog.
Inevitable after time, you're going to start experiencing brain fog. So we don't know. The thing is, we know in women going through natural menopause at around age 50, if you put hormones back in, their sleep might improve as vasomotor symptoms.
Interesting.
We don't always see an improvement in brain fog. And so that's a bit where the mystery lies. If we put hormones back in, is that going to help? If we track women across menopause and we test their cognition, we're not seeing broad scale cognitive decline or dysfunction in women across menopause. We're simply not, which is good news, because if we were, then we'd be very worried about Alzheimer's or dementia. What we're seeing is women are experiencing their brains not working properly, and we're not 100% sure of the reasons why. That said, the worse vasomotor symptoms and the worse sleep women have, the worse or more likely they are to report brain fog. Even if their cognitive test scores are okay. So it's a super complicated story.
Yeah.
Take away from it as, I think, the piece in the middle of the puzzle of a lot of issues around mood and cognitive fogginess is sleep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sleep's shit, everything else is beneficial.
Yeah, that's the scientific term for it.
It really is like this cog in the middle of the wheel.
Yeah.
And we all know that, but I sometimes think that poor sleep can be a difficult problem to solve for lots of people. Whereas normally I'm like this Olympic sleeper, my Fitbit gives me I'm a bear on my Fitbit and I get scores in, the 90s. Just last night, my husband was out of town. Because I was in a coma.
It's interesting. You brought up a few interesting points here. Like first, something which I really love that you said, it's like, it's not so A to B. It's not necessarily, it might be as simple as estrogen goes down, brain fog goes up, but
Would be
that would be right? But then it's like, no, I love that the estrogen could be the sleep disruptor to the fog. But then if that was just the case, right, putting the estrogen back in should improve that.
Well,
So
the thing is, giving women estrogen doesn't always just improve their sleep if their sleep has been disrupted for a very long time.
And there's other reasons.
Yeah, because insomnia has a large psychological component. That's not to say it's all in your head, but it becomes this sort of psychological behavioral issue. It could have had like this little physical trigger at the beginning. You got your hot flashes sorted, but you had disrupted sleep for so long, it's almost forgotten how to sleep well.
Absolutely. And then and to your point about Fitbit, I think sometimes it actually worsens because there's a habit like, oh, I wake up every day at 3. I can't go back to sleep till 3. I'm like, well, there's something that happens to you if you're looking every single day at 3 and like
yeah, don't look at you can't look at if you wake up in the middle of the night, apparently, because don't look at the clock.
Yeah, because you're training your brain, right, to wake up at that time. I mean, oversimplification, but it seems like my patients who have difficulty sleeping, once they start tracking it, they're really stuck in a tracking loop, like some sort of
and we know that cognitive behavioral therapy with the small letter I after it for insomnia isn't just about teaching you how to think about your sleep, all about sleep hygiene. It's like all of it's like, let's throw everything that we can at this problem of sleep and kind of re-educate you as a person, but re-educate your body, re-educate your mind to learn to prepare for sleep and learn to like love sleep and lean into sleep. And that's a hard thing to do if you've got physical kinds of levers being pushed or pulled, like you've got vasomotor disruption, you've got like super stressful events, your teenager comes in and says, I've got teenage boys, so I don't actually want to say out loud some of the things that they might come in and say because it might implicate me. But, they'll come in with
some news, in the middle, like it's bedtime.
And you're like, and then you don't sleep, or, you're worrying about your parents,
or nutrition. If you just had a glass of wine, if you just had
coffee after lunchtime,
sure.
Perhaps your exercise isn't right. Perhaps you're not respecting the light and dark cycles. You spend all your time both day and night under artificial light, and your body has no chance to follow natural circadian rhythms of rising and setting of the sun. So there's a million things. I do think that if we can get sleep at every stage of life, and I do say, and it does everything to protect both your cognitive health in the moment in terms of like peak performance, if that's your jam. It'll help these feelings of fogginess. It's very hard if you're a very good, healthy, well sleeper to also have brain fog. That's not as common. And then it's a preventative for long-term mental health disorders and reducing your risk of those problems. Mood disorders, again, are almost inevitable and go hand in hand with sleep problems. And then long-term, it protects your brain health as you age.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't be doing it for so much of each day if it wasn't this kind of fundamental, it wouldn't be like at the kind of the core of all good brain health.
Are you familiar with Dr. Dale Bredesen? He wrote the book for
I've heard
Alzheimer's. And so he's fascinating, and one of the things he says, and I think you really touched on it here, like he says that one of the reasons he couldn't get over the years large-scale funding for what he does is precisely because it is not one variable. It's several variables. He's like, preventing Alzheimer's is not like just take estrogen or just sleep more or just, it's like it's changing your nutrition and circadian rhythm and also estrogen and insulin resistance and, getting into ketosis and like all these variables. There's too many variables to test. So it's interesting.
Well,
in that sense, that's where he's saying that there as well as too many variables.
Yeah, well, the Lancet Commission comes out every few years as they kind of like updated look at what they understand are the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And you have to understand, like, risk is tips and scales in your favor or another. It doesn't mean that you will absolutely get or not get something. But they think, like, say a third, a third-ish, 30 to 40% of cases of dementia globally perhaps could be avoided by modifying lifestyle factors. And then even, like, when we talk about modifiable lifestyle factors or risk factors, there's a burden in there because not every person has the capacity or the understanding, the capabilities to be able to, like, live a perfect life. No one does that, and you could do all of the right things and still have really bad luck. But if we look at what those modifiable risk factors are, I mean, they start in childhood with education. That's a hard thing to say to someone who's in their 70s. Well, if you had the same education beyond the age of 12,
Right.
We understand, childhood education, we understand, what we need to do in midlife. And there's all of the things you talked about, things around metabolic health and heart health and blood pressure, not smoking, not drinking too much. But about 7% of cases of dementia globally we think are caused by hearing loss, untreated hearing loss.
That is absolutely
not. That's like one of the greatest risk factors. And no one's talking about that. It's not very sexy, really.
Yeah.
Treated hearing. And so that's like about protecting your hearing across midlife. And then if you've got hearing loss, to get it treated, to wear hearing aids.
Absolutely.
Such an unsexy, that is so much like, there's no kind of glamorous.
Yes.
Like,
you can't do several TikToks around that.
It's a bit boring. And then, when we're looking in later life, again, we've got vision loss. That's pretty boring as well to be talking about. And then things like social connection and
Sure.
So there's all of these kinds of ways that we need to be approaching that risk reduction. Actually, the latest Lancet that came out, Lancet Alzheimer's Disease Commission report that came out just a couple of months ago didn't even have hormone therapy in there, because right now hormone therapy at menopause, the data is quite mixed. Some studies say, it might reduce your risk a little. Others say, it might increase your risk a lot. It really depends on multiple factors around hormone therapy. So it's not in the guidelines because the data isn't clear enough at all to make that recommendation.
So switching from menopause to the book behind you.
Oh, which
Brain.
Like 1,000 books. And
No, the book, which I see Baby Brain you wrote. What's the other? Is that the other one you wrote?
this is the Woman's Brain book.
Okay.
First one. And this is this came out in 2018 and I'm currently writing a second edition update that's going to come out in 2025. It's got a cool new cover. And because I'm not a fan of this is the Australian cover, not much of a fan. And this is the book that I wrote that came out in 2023, which is looking at pregnancy and motherhood.
Okay, so
you can read the tagline, The Surprising Neuroscience of How Pregnancy and Motherhood Sculpt Our Brains and Change Our Minds for the Better.
for the better. Say more.
It explains
Tell us why it's for the better. Tell us why it's better.
Because I think this phrase here, baby brain, is what women through pregnancy and motherhood use to describe. It's a bit like brain fog.
Forgetfulness.
Almost as if you combine a female brain with some hormones and a reproductive transition, and the only possible outcome could be cognitive dysfunction and hyperactivity.
That's insane.
It's insane, right? We starts at puberty, and then like you're screwed forever.
You're screwed forever, and then menopause makes it worse. So no matter what,
This was makes it worse, and then you're just like an old hag. So you might as well just do it.
it's phenomenal. Then
No point in our lives is there any upside, which I don't believe is quite what Mother Nature, which is what I like to call evolution, intended. And the data doesn't support that either. So again, there's a couple of stories around this concept of baby brain. The first is that word that, again, women are using to describe their perceived cognitive function. When we follow women from before pregnancy through pregnancy and then afterwards, we look at like longitudinal studies, which are like the best way to get a good gauge on what is happening. We are not seeing any changes in cognition in women through pregnancy and in early motherhood. Even when they say, hey, I'm experiencing baby brain, we're not picking up anything. Sometimes in the third trimester of pregnancy, they might score like, instead of like, say, 20 out of 20 on verbal recall, they might score 19 out of 20. It's not clinically significant. It's not even always statistically significant. And it's only in some women some of the time. Sometimes we actually see cognitive enhancement in that third trimester of pregnancy. But so we've got this kind of paradox of women's reported experiences and what the scientists in the research labs say, but we've interrogated that now. And we know a large component of that is poor well-being gets equated with poor brain function. If you're not socially supported, you're not getting enough sleep, like things are just tough because motherhood is hard work, you're more likely to report all of the things not working. And on top of that, we've got this like cognitive load, the emotional labour of motherhood, and very well described phenomenon. So women are trying to do all of the things. But the second story about pregnancy is that we now know that during the course of a woman's first pregnancy, the hormones of pregnancy completely sculpt and rewire and refine her brain such that she's almost like cognitively driven to focus only in on her baby. So you've got women trying to do all of the things in her brain. What evolution's intention was that pregnancy would tune focus solely in on your baby, which
Whoa.
the evolutionary mandate, right? You're concerned by thinking about your baby when you're
make sure it survives.
think about anything else.
Okay,
And then you're thinking you can remember the email and the keys and where you put the bananas and the shopping list and your husband's jocks and socks and all. But everyone expects
This is amazing. This is amazing. I have to just,
to tell you what,
tell me.
as women persist in blaming their brain for not being able to do it all, and that suits society because no one needs to help because it's her baby brain. When actually, it is not her brain that's the problem, and that's not her brain that is letting her
demands.
Down. It's everyone else letting her down, and it's still. And you know that phrase, supermom?
Yeah.
I hate the phrase because it's like, oh, ask the supermom, ask the busy woman. Yeah, if you want to get something done, ask the supermom. Well, when she can't do it all, that's okay because she'll just blame her brain.
This is mind-blowing. I'm going to say it back because I want to make sure I understand it. I want to make sure my audience understands it. And this is why I love this podcast. Okay. So I want to make sure I'm saying it right. So we're walking around all of our lives. I have 3 children of my own. And during this time, we're like baby brain, mom brain, everything.
Puberty brain,
teenage brain, menopause brain, like basically everything. But let's just stay with the baby brain for a moment, right? Baby brain. And in essence, you're saying 2 things, right? You're saying, first of all, it's nothing to do with your brain because we did the test and it's not your hormones. You're saying it's the demand of everything around. And then you're saying it's even worsened after the baby's born because you are designed to really focus on this child evolutionarily. And so everything else becomes periphery, not because of baby brain, because you're correctly focused on the survival of the species.
Yeah. So what we remember depends on our attention, what information we take in and what we filter out. And a newborn mother's brain has been primed by pregnancy to figure out how to look after this baby.
Yeah.
So the brain is very plastic and it's streamlined to tune into the baby's cues.
It's amazing.
We evolved as like allo parents. We evolved to like parent in groups and tribes. And so mothers have always had helpers. We've had other people to cook and clean and look after us and nurture us and look after everyone else so we can look after the baby. But that's not how we live anymore. We live where we've got to look after the baby and also do all of the others.
Yeah, all of the things. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's not our brains that are letting us down.
This is funny because, and I knew we would get to a point like this at the podcast because one of the questions I ask all the guests that I bring on is, how are you a disruptor? And you wrote, I'm not a disruptor. And maybe I shouldn't.
I'm not a disruptor of medicine.
Oh, okay. She's not a medical disruptor. Okay, so you're invented the word medical.
No, not in the medical profession.
Yeah, but you're a disruptor then in which world?
Well, I don't resonate with that. But
for your ideas do, though.
They're not my ideas. I'm just talking about what the neuroscience is.
Okay, so you're not a disruptor, but these concepts are disruptive?
Am I what, sorry?
These concepts are disruptive. They're disruptive to the narrative that we've been.
Yeah, maybe. I don't resonate with that. That doesn't feel like me because I actually don't really mind what people do with that information, and I'm not sharing that information to disrupt anything. I'm just sharing because I actually think it's interesting.
Okay.
And people do with it what they want. I'm not intending to. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old to. Because you put this information as you will.
Well, certainly, of course, right, and that's true for everything. But like. Don't you think that something's interesting? Something makes something interesting and not like something that is normal. The interesting things tends to be, I don't know. I am blown away by this. And maybe the word disruptive for you has a negative connotation. For me, it's so powerful.
It feels like it's intentional. Like I'm not intending to be disruptive.
Okay.
Rather, I'm just thinking about cool science.
And you an accidental.
Gets disrupted. Someone gets disrupted. I'm like, okay, you be disrupted then.
No, I think the narrative of what we feed ourselves as moms, as women, is disrupted with.
I suppose people find that sometimes uncomfortable because there's sometimes pushback. So if you talk about brain fog and menopause, and you talk about baby brain, you go, look, most of the well-designed studies aren't picking this up. People feel quite dismissed, and I'm not. They go, but are you saying it's all in my head? And I'm like,
right.
not that.
Oh, you think this will make them feel dismissed?
Yes, some people do feel, when I say, so that's why I always have to say, when the cognitive testing, the labs are picking up what you say you're feeling, then people think, well, the test must not be designed correctly or whatever. You know, they feel like that's just the scientist saying my experience isn't valid and real. And it's like, no, your experience is valid or real, but the reason for your experience isn't what you think it might be.
Sure.
You think it's your brain not working properly. It's your brain is doing something completely different from what you're expecting it should be doing.
And that feeling, back to what you're saying earlier, this is a very interesting point. That feeling saying earlier of what brain fog feels to someone may not be measured by a cognitive test. So you're passing the cognitive test.
Yes.
But that sensation, that subjective sensation, which is very much real, I think is harder to quantify or test for. It's very subjective. And so
look,
I could see how that's dismissive, but maybe it's because we don't have the right tool yet to
and some people say, well, perhaps we're not measuring, we haven't got the right tool. And that could be the case. But even if we do, what we would call a battery of tests, you do like 10 different kinds of tests, we're getting more sophisticated, and we're getting big enough data sets that we can start to unpack, like, what are some of the factors that are leading towards these experiences. And people want there to be easy answers. They want it to be, well, my brain's not working.
Yeah.
Brains.
Okay, well, that's true. People want easy answers.
People like a good female hormone to blame. I think.
Yeah. No,
that's the easy scapegoat versus perhaps changing a narrative hold ourselves through our life.
The narrative, but also all of it. Like, people will come to me often and be like, what supplements should I take? And I'm like, none. Supplements are nice. They're supplemental. I like supplements. But if we are not going to make like these next 10 or 15 changes, like what we're putting in our bodies, we're exposed to, then the supplement. So you're right. Everybody wants this A to B. And this goes back to also Dr. Berthez, and like, there's so many variables and if you're drinking wine every night, to your point, we'd replace the estrogen and the person still has brain fog because there's other.
Probably because the wine is disrupting your sleep. It's disrupting your brain, but it's also disrupting your sleep.
Right. So
you've got maybe if you drink wine for breakfast, then it might disrupt your sleep, but then that's probably
disrupt your job and your employment.
Advice either. That's like if you want to go out with girlfriends and have a glass of wine and like hoot with laughter, that's actually probably better for you than sitting on they're all going to have a drink. So these things are always super complicated, and the thing with science is when you try and do it really well and carefully, it's starting to change because we've got different data sets that are shared and biobanks, and we've got, machine learning to analyze it. So we're starting to get little signals detectable where we couldn't see it before because we didn't have enough data. But when you start to do very careful studies and you can account for all of these variables, sometimes you see nothing. Sometimes it comes out going, well, there's nothing. Nothing was nothing. It's all. And it's the interaction.
Yes.
Like genes interact with your environment to, be then, a particular behavior might emerge or disease might emerge at a particular point in the lifespan. It wasn't just the gene or just the environment or just the point in the lifespan. You had to have like the combination of all three.
And the right trigger.
And so that's why it is always very hard to you can't draw the dots from A to B to C to D very easily.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I don't mind that. But
but it's hard to sell something like that. In the world of sales.
The biopsychosocial model does not drive the algorithms. I mean, let me tell you that.
It does not drive the algorithm.
It's a bit like hearing loss for dementia.
It's not niche enough. It's not like there's not one hashtag.
Even if you add in the niche of women, it's
still too broad. It's still too broad. Oh my God. All right. So what do you want women who listen to this, what do you want them to take away from your learning, your book, your teachings?
I think that was one thing that we have been talked about, but I can sum it up quite quickly. One is that what is sleep? I mean, sleep's the big piece in the middle of the puzzle and everything else fits in around that. We've talked about that. The other is, and it's related to this idea of hormones and us thinking that they're like the loudest voice in the crowd when it comes to a brain. But what we see at every point of the lifespan, what does a newborn baby need? What do kids go through school need and react and respond to, and puberty, what happens, and teenagers, what are risk factors and protective factors, and new mum, whether every point of the lifespan. And it's very easy to default back to, especially when we're talking about girls and women, females, hormones, when what my book found was that it was actually other people, and it was social relationships, and it was like the social architecture that you have around you that can be the greatest kind of protective, nurturing factor, but it also can be like the great disruptor. And I think that it's other people, it's like literally the crowd that is the loudest voice in the crowd when it comes to brain health. So if there's almost two things there, there's the sleep and the social connection. And we know that if we drop one or the other of them, then you're at the greatest possible risk that you could be for, poor health or mental health.
Sleep and social connections.
Yeah. So I was speaking to a social science researcher who's up at University of Queensland here, and he said to me that there's nothing that disease likes to get its teeth into more than a lonely person. Because if you are lonely, which is different from being alone, but if you are lonely, you are so incredibly vulnerable physiologically and mentally and logically that, the consequences are pretty dire. And I don't think that the social context gets given enough credit at each point in the lifespan when we're looking at women's health, because it's just so much sexier to focus in on hormones.
Whoa, that was really powerful, that loneliness statement. That is really powerful. We definitely don't talk enough about it. And I think people are lonelier than ever with all of our
Most people.
Yeah. And so, wow, that is really powerful. I just have a question for you. So we said sleep and we said social connections, which without question, I don't know if you're familiar at all with functional medicine, but those are two things that we will talk about with every one of our clients. But you didn't spend a lot of time, I don't know if this is purposeful or just because we haven't touched on it, on diet, on what people eat. Does nutrition play a role in it? Because I know we're always talking about insulin resistance and let alone, diabetes and what that does.
Yeah. I think it does. I just think that diet nutrition's boring.
Yeah.
But it's like we all know, but no one does it.
Okay, so you're not talking about it because it's not relevant. You're not talking about it because it just bores you.
Boring.
Okay, perfect.
It's important.
Okay.
Don't eat the shitty crap that's made in a factory.
I am the first person who ever said that on my podcast.
And just eat the whole foods, like what we evolved to do. It's not hard. I mean, it's not hard to say out loud, but it's probably hard for many people to do, bearing in mind where I live is a very healthy, wealthy, high well-being part of the planet on the northern beaches of Sydney. And, we have endless supplies of fresh food here. It's easy where I live to eat well, particularly in the...
Okay, maybe that's why it's so obvious to you, because...
It is so obvious compared to, say, the US.
Yeah, the US is just with all its leftovers mess. Yeah.
And diet is complex because it's not just about you and the individual choices you make to stick and what you put into your mouth, the kind of the ecosystem in which you live, like I say. So I don't think it's that interesting because I don't think it's that complex. There's not much to figure out.
No,
it's more encouraging people to do what they should be doing versus arguing about should it be walnuts or blueberries.
That's fair. That's so fair. Oh my God. Oh, this is priceless. Okay. Is there anything else that we should talk about that I forgot to ask you about? I mean, obviously there's years and days worth of conversation, but something that you want everyone to know.
I don't think so.
Is there something empowering that we should take away from this?
Yeah, I don't really resonate with that word either.
You're women.
You tell them about the science, and you just deal with that. If you feel empowered or you feel disrupted, you do that.
I love that.
Really.
Okay, so I have to call this episode.
Really have some good friends to have a laugh with. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't eat too much rubbish. Get a dog. They're nice. They're annoying, but they're lovely, and they'll keep you out and about. And honestly, then the cheesy saying about salt water, wet tears or the ocean cures all. And I live by the beach. I'm looking out at it at the moment, and
That is so cool.
Might head there after this call.
I'm going to have to call this like the accidental,
That's funny.
The disruptive who refuses to be called a disruptive. I feel like I'm non-disruptive. I just say things.
But I feel like what I say is very similar to what a lot of people in my kind of like world think and feel. So it's hard for me to look beyond.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't really feel like looking beyond that because I can't control what's out there. We're just
so in the context of your world, this doesn't feel disruptive. That's interesting. Because I would say sometimes I feel the same way. Like I talk about the same thing so often that it feels standard, but then I go into circles and they're like, this is mind blowing. I'm like, is it? So that's an interesting perspective, the context of
world. Like, who you play with and have fun with and love with and
that's interesting. Okay, so let me let you start your day. I really appreciate your time on this medical disruptor show for someone who's not medical or a disruptor. And it was funny because you wrote that and I was like, I still want to meet her. I think she's awesome. I found your stuff to be disruptive, but I guess that's my problem.
Yeah, you do that. You be disruptive.
My problem. That's my issue. That's amazing. Keep doing this work because we need this. And there's something really refreshing about the objectiveness of it. It's like, this is just the data. Do with it what you will. I think that's amazing. It has no agenda, which is really refreshing.
Yeah.
You're not trying to, it's great. I think we need more of that. And then people should do what they want with that information. I love that. Amazing. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Fun conversation. I enjoyed that.